Okay, so we will start off with some remarks from me, yours truly, and then we will have the head of the Environmental Sustainability Cluster at the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States to deliver some remarks, as well as the Executive Director of the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute, as we know it, Canary, to also deliver remarks. As you may know that this webinar is a joint effort between OECS and Canary. We will then have the presentation. Our featured speaker is Mr. Michael Andrew, who is an economist by profession originally, but now he has so many hats wearing. And this will be followed by a panel discussion with the question and answer sessions at the same time combined. So Judith Ephraim will be our moderator, and we have our panelists from the private sector, from civil society, Canary, I would say, as well as Mr. McHale himself. And I am missing David Robin, who is also a panelist, and he will be representing the blue economy. Okay, so just to indicate that the member states, the 11 member states of the OECS, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, we have a population of just over 1 billion inhabitants. Actually, about half of them in the French-speaking islands. We have the French departments, the Martinique and Guadeloupe. We also have the associated member states. We also have the overseas territories of British Virgin Islands and Willa, and Montserrat is a full member, as well as the 6 independent member states. Among us, these are island states, 11 states, we have a greater proportion of seascape as against landmass. And as such, the green and blue economies are integrally intertwined, and the synergies must be acknowledged. Also, due to our relatively small size, the impacts of land-based interventions are quickly reflected in our marine space and our freshwater resources. The OECS Commission has been promoting the island systems management approach in the region, and this includes fostering synergies between green and blue economies. The Green-Blue Economy Strategy and Action Plan is a collaborated effort between the OECS and Canary, and is also a mandate from the OECS Council of Ministers for Environmental Sustainability. We acknowledge and thank the European Union for their assistance in providing support to the development of this strategy. I would now like to invite Mr. Chamberlain Emmanuel to deliver some remarks.
Thank you very much, Joan, and good morning to everyone, or good afternoon if you are in a different time zone. Let me also add my voice in welcoming you to this webinar. We are delighted to be able to host this session, even as we continue to acknowledge yesterday's continuing celebration of Earth Day. Joan has really set a good framework in terms of the foundation, the background to this conversation today. I will simply add that even in the current context that we are in, with the tremendous economic impact of the COVID-19 crisis, it is imperative that we in the small island developing states of the Caribbean look in a very accelerated way at how we not just survive, but rise out of this situation in a way that is even more sustainable. It is said that one should really not waste a good crisis, and see how in rising we can ameliorate some of the mistakes we may have made in the past, especially referring to our environmental sustainability, so that we will discover new or amended approaches to our economic activity, so that we ensure our natural resources remain a very dependable source of supporting our economic activity. So I look forward to the conversation today, and I am very excited, and I know that our future presenter, Mikhail, will do an excellent job, and I invite you to stay tuned and also to engage. We really want to hear from you. We want to hear your feedback. We have gone through various processes, but we really want to hear from a broader audience, your perspectives and your recommendations, so that the very final version of this can take into account all perspectives from civil society, from private sector, and the broader public sector, so that the final product will be one that is truly robust and representative. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chamberlain. I'd like to call on Ms. Nicole Leota, the Executive Director of CANARI, to also give some remarks.
Thank you very much, Joan. And it's such a pleasure to be collaborating with the OECS again on this initiative, which we've been working on together for multiple years. This is really the culmination of many years of work together. And I just want to give a little background on CANARI, why CANARI is involved in this. So CANARI, Caribbean Natural Resource Institute, we are a non-profit technical institute working across the Caribbean for over 30 years, but really we were born in the Eastern Caribbean and have a very long history of work in the OECS region, currently about 15 projects. Our vision is to empower Caribbean people. Empowered Caribbean people are transforming and integrating social, economic, and ecological systems to achieve equity, well-being, and resilience. So the idea of green, blue economies and economic development that's environmentally sustainable, inclusive, and resilient really resonates with us, and we have an area of work on this. This work really started since 2010, when the term green economy first came onto the global stage. And CANARI has been facilitating dialogues with Caribbean stakeholders since then on what that means in the Caribbean context. What does that mean for us? And we've conducted research on the issues, analyzed policies, institutional frameworks, and done quite a lot of work on supporting nature-based local community microenterprises as a key pathway towards an inclusive, environmentally sustainable, resilient economy in the Caribbean. This work currently builds on all of that and really is happening under a great MOU that we have with the OECS to work on multiple areas. And we're very pleased to be working with them on this. And as Joan said, I'd just like to also recognize the support of the European Union, which is supporting CANARI's work on green blue economy under a global project managed by the Green Economy Coalition. So we're really excited to be reached this point in our journey and happy to have all of you join us today, and looking forward to the discussions and your input on how this transformation can happen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Nicole. So we are now going to go to our presenter. And just to again introduce Mr. McHale Andrew. He is a development economist with a wide range of expertise, ranging from investment promotion, economic analysis and policy formulation, tourism market intelligence and research, strategic planning, business and institutional management, to name a few. McHale has had several high-level positions. He was a former Chief Executive Officer of Invest St. Lucia, which is a national investment promotion agency, Executive Vice President of the St. Lucia Hotel and Tourism Association. He was also a Research and Development Advisor at the Caribbean Tourism Organization and a Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Tourism in St. Lucia, as well as Director of External Relations at the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. He has also been involved with a number of associations, such as the Caribbean Association of Investment Promotion Agencies, the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute, and also a key member of the Green Economy Action Learning Group. He's a great believer in the triple bottom line approach to development, and you will hear him mentioning this. I'm sure he will be pushing this to the participants throughout his presentation. So McHale, welcome, and you're welcome to also share your screen as soon as I stop sharing mine.
Good morning, Joan, and thank you, and welcome to everyone. It is indeed a pleasure to be able to speak with such a motley and well-connected group of participants. From what I've seen, it spans the spectrum, not just the Caribbean, but internationally as well. So welcome. Just by way of background, with the mandates for this study, as Nicole pointed out, it's a collaboration between CANARI and the OECS Commission. In April 2017, we had a ministerial mandate to develop a green economy in the OECS sub-region that was inclusive. We then did a diagnostic study based on the Green Economy Coalition's Green Economy Barometer. And that study came up with a number of conclusions that basically said that while the OECS, they had a number of green shoots of initiatives that were generally in the direction of the implementation of a green economy, they were not mainstreamed enough and they were not significant enough to conclusively say that they were on a path towards a green economy implementation or transformation. In July 2018, the OECS Committee for Environmental Sustainability further mandated the development of a strategic action plan for an inclusive green, and this time they included blue economy in the OECS. And in April, May 2019, CANARI and OECS formalized a partnership through an MOU to develop the Green Blue Economy Strategy and Action Plan. And so here I am today. The diagnostic study in 2018 spoke of a number of key issues that needed to be focused on the way to developing sustainable, inclusive green blue economy strategy and action plan. Among those was the need to reform finance, specifically to support natural capital accounting, but even more so to ensure that the reform of finance got its genesis from the governments themselves. Reallocation of existing finances is perhaps the way to go in small resource poor countries. And also resource scarcity is not an excuse. What needs to happen in situations like that is more resourcefulness as opposed to lamenting resource scarcity. And of course, a number of sectors, priority sectors such as tourism, agriculture, waste management, water, energy was some of the priority sectors that were identified for greening. Given the fact that almost every business in the OECS by definition is small, according to international standards, and micro in many instances, and given the fact that they are the ones that form the fulcrum of economic development and economic activity in our small OECS countries, it was very important to underscore the need to support micro and small enterprises as well as vulnerable persons to ensure that they were included in the pathway towards developing a green-blue economy. And of course, key partnerships, we will talk about a little later, very critical for that task. So in embarking on the new assignment, which is now the Green-Blue Economy Strategy and Action Plan, I want to start by underscoring the fact that this is not in any way a blueprint. While we were mandated by the OECS comms to develop a strategy and action plan, I want to say that this is really just a framework that provides a guideline for the countries collectively and individually to transition towards the implementation of a strategy. So this is not per se an action plan, but really a framework for moving to an action plan. So we did the usual desk reviews, did surveys, and I have to say the surveys were not very well responded to, despite 4 different manifestations of those surveys. Every time simplified a little more, but you know, we still hope to get the input, not just here, but you know, after this presentation. If there is anything that can be sent via email, we would welcome that. So we then moved on to the action plan development, and very importantly, it was mandated that the action plan should guide resource mobilization and implementation, and there were to be identified 2 or 3 selected priority areas for greening. So having done that, we are now confronted with a new reality. The new reality is COVID-19 that everyone knows. And no lesser a person than Pope Francis. For those of you who are Catholic, I'm sure you know who that person is. Those of you who don't, I think he's deemed the head of the Catholic Church, or deputy God for some Catholics. But he, in an emailed encyclical to an Italian newspaper on March 13th, I think it was. No, it was April, just after Easter Monday, April 13th, made the point that perhaps, just perhaps, the pandemic may be nature's response to the climate crisis. And we're not going to dwell on that too much, but it's just something to be kept in mind. But I think more than that, there are lessons from this crisis that can lend to the urgency of developing a structured green-blue economy or new economy, however we term it, not just to respond to the crisis, but to safeguard and guarantee the balanced, sustainable, inclusive development of the small, vulnerable countries of the OECS. So one of the realities is that the socio-economic dislocation, loss of jobs, closure of businesses, and no one knows when there will be a so-called recovery, because recovery is not in the context that we have been accustomed to. It's going to be a whole new dispensation, and no one knows when that will happen. But there's the reality that the dislocation could very well cause a mad rush into business as usual and just plug in gaps in the one-dimensional economic development thrust that we have been accustomed to. And so that has to be something that should be considered and should be guarded against. Some of the key lessons from COVID-19, the coronavirus crisis, is one, the importance of the nexus between science or knowledge and policy. No longer can we just implement policy just because or for political or other expedient reasons. It has to be based on the science, it has to be based on knowledge. And I think this would place the drive towards a green, blue, or new economy in a much more powerful context. The second lesson is the need for proactivity, the need for self-reliance, and of course, resilience, economic resilience to ensure business continuity, to ensure that we are able to protect supply chains, for us to protect livelihoods, and for us to be less dependent on international trade, generally speaking. But of course, resilience also means socioeconomic resilience. Ensure that the people for whom development is targeted, the people who are the essence of development, are not further marginalized in this process. And of course, the environment, the physical environment, that is our perhaps second biggest asset after our people, that has to be safeguarded because it's the foundation of all development. And the need for domestic resource use efficiency, which I mentioned earlier with respect to finance, but with everything else, that is another lesson that has been underscored by the virus. So we now move on to the sustainability principles, which drive the green blue economy, or however we want to call it. I prefer a new economy, but we can discuss that later. But there are 4 principles that were developed by the Green Economy Coalition in association with its plethora of members representing international institutions that straddle a spectrum of agencies across the world. And they came up with those principles. The first principle is the well-being principle, which basically says that the economy would enable all people to create and enjoy prosperity. So well-being and inclusiveness, very critical. Then there's the issue of justice. The justice principle basically says that the economy would promote equity within and between generations. And the planetary boundaries principle speaks to the economy safeguarding, restoring, and investing in nature. And finally, the efficiency and sufficiency principle deals with the economy and its ability to support sustainable consumption and sustainable production. So once we look at those 4 principles, we can see that they support the triple bottom line approach to development, which is economic efficiency, environmental sustainability, and social justice and equity. So using those 4 principles, we have translated it in real terms to what are the 4 key issues to be dealt with in the OECS Green Blue Economy effort. And of course, economic development, inclusiveness and equity, ecological sustainability, and resilience. And that itself translates to the green economy, blue economy, green growth, low carbon development, and climate resilient development. So with that in mind, we have come to a definition. It is a bit of a mouthful, but of course it is thrown out here for your own review. Those of you who represent the countries, the 12 member countries of the OECS. The definition says that an OECS green blue economy is an economically viable, climate resilient economy that is based largely on sustainable domestic production and investment and pursues long-term prosperity for its entire population, in particular its most vulnerable, through socio-economic inclusiveness, responsible management of its coastal, marine, and other ecological resources, and very importantly, transparent participatory governance. So the goal is really from vulnerability to resilience. And to do that, our research shows that we need to focus on data-driven planning and visioning. We need to have an effective communications and engagement strategy. We need to harmonize sustainability and development priorities across the OECS and among the agencies, international and regional, that support the OECS, as well as the domestic agencies. We need to reform domestic finance and investment. It is imperative that institutions, developmental and executed institutions, need to be enabled to support the thrust towards a green-blue economy. Of course, our key resource, our human resources, need to be trained, need to be enabled to be able to implement, as well as to review, to evaluate, and to support the thrust towards a green-blue economy. Because we are talking of 12 member countries, regional coordination and leadership within that OECS spectrum, but even across the wider Caribbean divide is critical to success. And we spoke already of greening key sectors and supporting micro and small and medium enterprises. These are the key objectives. So from a philosophical point of view, what is it we are trying to see? The message really is one of positive arithmetic. Nothing is ever built by division, and nothing grows by subtraction. If we focus on positive arithmetic, multiplication and addition, then we see that a green-blue economy is about a positive economic thrust, positive social inclusion, environmental sustainability, and good governance. So if you put it in real terms, what this means is if there is any investment proposal or any policy prescription that in any way negates any one of those principles, it would not be consonant with a green-blue economy. So anything that compromises social equity, anything that compromises economic viability and prosperity or environmental sustainability and resilience building should not be considered. That is basically what we say. And so the central pillars, just to summarize, we need the vision, we need good governance to ensure that vision is prosecuted. We need resources, human resources, finance, data, technology. We need policy action, and we need management to ensure that sectors are green, and we need the institutions and the regulatory structure to allow those things to happen. And so the strategic steps follow those pillars. The first one is the OECS Political Directorate and its supporting public sector, as well as the private sector, which is the implementer, has to adopt the vision. So the first thrust has to be a mechanism that will ensure that a holistic vision is adopted. Secondly, engagement, targeted advocacy, which is engaging the political and the captains of industry, the private sector, NGOs, civil society, to ensure that they all buy in. Once that has happened, then you need a separate mass communications to mobilize the average person, the vulnerable people, the small enterprises, the NGOs that are involved in production and in the supporting vulnerable peoples. They need to be engaged, and that has to be done with expert communication. It cannot be simply, we technical people go in there and speaking. We have to engage persons who know how to communicate, because there is a saying that was a famous literary person by the name of George Bernard Shaw, 1925 Nobel laureate. He says that the challenge of communication is the illusion that it has taken place. So that has to be borne in mind. And of course, resource mobilization, which we'll speak about later, governance, institutional and regulatory reform, management of the sectors, and monitoring and evaluation. So having done that, we now come up with the proposed framework or action plan. What that says is, first and foremost, the responsible agencies would be OECS, Canary, of course, and the governments would engage in the advocacy and mass communication and education within the short and medium term. Resource mobilization, the institutions, the implementing agency, the coordinating agency would be the OECS Secretariat or the OECS Commission, sorry. But of course, the supporting financial institutions, developmental institutions, the Caribbean Development Bank, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, the governments themselves would have to be involved in the resource mobilization, which is focused on public finance reallocation, access in climate finance, access in development finance that is conducive to the G-BE, and of course, restructuring and streamlining the whole approach to investment. Then there is the issue of good governance, and we believe that there are wider Caribbean institutions, including CARICAD, that can assist the governments with standard setting to ensure transparency, accountability, and inclusiveness, with real public sector reform, which we can speak of later. The required legislative and constitutional reforms that are required, but the whole focus of the public sector reform should move from a mode of proscription. Do not do. If you look at the laws, if you look at a lot of the policies, they all focus on do not do this, as opposed to this is how it should be done. If you look at our planning laws, it's usually yay or no. But we need to move to this is how it should be done. So you have a little more facilitated approach. And of course, implementation and management of the sectors, where everyone is involved, and the private sector has a great role to play in there. We have 4 projects for greening sectors that we'll talk about, but very important partnerships necessary, and planning and adopting best practices. And in best practices, let me just say that one of the advantages of being small, as we are in the OECS, is that when you are such a small country, almost anything that you have to do has been done before. So you can adapt international best practices to your own peculiarities, and once they're applicable, you can follow. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And finally, we talk about monitoring. We have to set standards, but we have to regularly review, structure, pivot as necessary to ensure that those standards meet whatever new realities confront us, but do not compromise those 4 key G-BE principles. So we've come up with 3 projects just based on, what could possibly be the first steps towards implementing a green-blue economy. So we have a short term. In the short term, we have 2 projects. Medium term, we have 1, and long term, we have another. So in the 2 short-term ones, alternative energy, and that builds on what has been happening with the OECS Sustainable Energy Unit and other related initiatives, like in St. Kitts with geothermal, St. Lucia with the geothermal, solar in many of the other countries, wind in 1 or 2 of them. That has to be coordinated. Perhaps a bulletin board, an electronic bulletin board of best practices could be done. And so we can replicate the successes from one country to the other. But it has to be a coordinated short-term project. The second one is a circular economy or waste management, however you want to call it, but really it's trying to get small and medium enterprises involved in a project that would use, reuse, and rather than make waste dispose, using the circular economy principles of using as much of their waste as possible in other productive processes without in any way selling the environment. In St. Lucia, we had the Development Bank involved with the part of its NAP process, the National Climate Adaptation Plan, proposing a model sustainable housing. And we believe that that is something in the medium term that could be embraced perhaps by most of the OECS countries, because that would be the proof in planning. So you talk about, sustainable, resilient materials for developing housing, inclusive, financial inputs, sustainable, waste management practices, water, rainwater harvesting, separating your water use between sanitary and non-sanitary uses and using water accordingly, alternative energy, and all those other things could be something that could be looked at. And then for the long term, we believe that a comprehensive green-blue economy master plan, modeled on some of the green shoots, modeled on the CREED in Dominica, which is an executing agency for sustainable development, for climate resilient development, for low carbon development. In St. Lucia, we have something called Prime Minister's Implementation Unit that looks at projects, but there is no sustainability. There is no green-blue economy approach to that implementation initiative. In Grenada, we have lots of discussions, policy papers, and excellent advocacy on the blue economy. But there doesn't seem to be enough of the inclusiveness, participatory approach. Neither is there a sense that the approach is imbued with sustainability and the 4 principles that we spoke about. So all those things could be looked at and be built upon. And so we come to the conclusion. I think in conclusion, what we are trying to do is to move the OECS from vulnerability to sustainability and eventually to prosperity. The COVID-19 situation has shown that we are even more vulnerable than we thought. It's not just natural disasters, but the vulnerability of our economies, of our supply chains, of our livelihoods, to phenomena that did not have its genesis within the OECS, but were imported through travel, to trade. These are things that we have to be very aware of, and we have to build our systems to minimize, if not prevent, those things. So we really have to move from the esoteric jargon, and a lot of it is what you hear me speaking about now, and that niche perception of sustainability, of climate resilient approaches, to mainstreaming a green-blue economy and ensuring that it's done through action as opposed to just policies and talking. It has to be action, because one of the things that is clear to us is that we cannot afford the luxury of perpetual dialogue. We now have to move to action. Then, of course, we have to expertly link the economy, society, and the environment in lucid messages that engage the population and spur them into embrace and into action. We have to stress resilience, 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 and innovation across all sectors. Today is the tomorrow that we worried about yesterday, but we have to start tomorrow to do the things that are necessary if we want to see a brighter day ahead. And so it's critical that we use this crisis in a way, as Paul Romer said, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And so we need to use that lag time to start to reflect and to build winnable partnerships across the board. Partnerships on finance, partnerships on resource mobilization, public-private sector partnerships, partnerships with civil society and governments, partnership between the private sector and civil society, regional partnerships, partnerships with international agencies, partnerships with institutions and countries that have done it, and we can benefit from the best practices. So that is, in a nutshell, the presentation. I'd welcome your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mikhail, and I'm looking forward to a very interesting discussion, especially after this presentation, quite thought-provoking. So right now, we will be introducing our panel, or we'll be having our panel discussion. And I just want to say a couple of things. One, that there is a question and answer icon at the bottom of your screen, so you can put questions that you may have specific, again, to the presentation in that box, and the panel would answer, or either live or by written, depends on how much time we have there. Also be aware that we also have a poll, because this is a series of webinars, and our aim is to have a weekly webinar, at least one per week. And we would like your feedback on this webinar to assist us in improving the quality and relevance of the future webinars and our work. The questionnaire, which is in the poll icon, will take less than 5 minutes to respond. So before you leave, please ensure that you assist us by completing that poll. Also to note that the PowerPoint presentation, as well as the executive summary of the OECS Green Blue Economy Strategy and Action Plan, will be made available on the OECS and Canary websites. And we also welcome feedback and comments from you all on that. So right now, onto the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Joan. Good day to all our webinar participants, and of course you, the organizers. Let me first of all thank Mikhail for this very insightful and thought-provoking presentation. Now, I'm pleased to be part of this panel, not only to join the esteemed panelists, but also because I think this topic here, as we have seen, is very relevant and timely. Mikhail, I want to start off by saying that you are not alone in your thinking that the green economy really is one of the key elements in addressing this COVID-19 pandemic. The UN Secretary General, in his address to commemorate the observance of Earth Day yesterday, he really underscored the need for the recovery efforts for COVID-19 to focus on a clean green transition, green jobs, and a green economy. And he also highlighted the need for sustainable solutions and solutions that were resilient. So let me start off by just providing some of my personal comments on what you've discussed. And I will touch on the area of energy, as this is the area that I am most familiar with. Mikhail, you showed on the screen a definition, like you said, quite a mouthful, but I think it was because we really wanted to capture all the parts of this green blue economy for the region. But the point I want to really focus on is that the green blue economy is aimed to support sustainable domestic production and inward investment. And I think that is where you really see the clear connection with energy. I think a number of studies, including one that was recently undertaken by the Caribbean Development Bank, recognize that renewable energy and energy efficiency, they have an important part in this green economy transition. And one of the strategies that this piece of work that you have undertaken seeks to do is really to mainstream this, to bring it into our tourism, to bring it into our manufacturing, to bring it into our productive sectors. And one of the greatest challenges for us in the region and for most of the small island developing states is the cost of energy and also energy security when it comes to manufacturing. And I think that is where, when we speak about the green economy, we need some additional efforts. And I'm sure the participants from the private sector, they would also have some comments to provide in this regard. I think the interest is there from our countries, from the private sector particularly, for the green economy. There's also interest for renewable energy and energy efficiency. But when it comes to costs in terms of the investments that are necessary so that, you know, our economies can be resilient, our enterprises can be resilient, we are not dependent on an imported fuel source for our domestic production, it's important for us to put in measures to address this. So we have to look at the policy environment, we have to look at the legislative environment. For instance, we have to look at the requirements or the allowances for the amount or the sizes of renewable energy technology systems that can be incorporated on a business. And how does that really impact the decision to invest or not in a technology like that, which we, you know, advocate can really help us with that transition. So I think the cost is important. The cost of renewable energies has been decreasing, but with this whole onset of COVID, what does it mean for the price, for instance, of solar technology? How will it affect it? And what would be the implications for our businesses who want to invest in those? So these are just some thoughts, but I will turn it over to some of our other colleagues. And as Joan indicated, as we speak, we encourage you to please make your contributions through the chat. And I'd like to turn it firstly to my colleague, David Robin, who really has been leading the work on the blue economy at the OECS. So David, we'll be happy to hear some of your thoughts in this area. And we noticed we've said green blue economy, brought the two concepts together, and to share some of the work that the OECS Commission is doing in that regard.
Thank you very much, Judith. Good morning. Good morning to Mikhail. Good morning to all of the persons who are with us. And good afternoon, depending on where you are, because I'm aware that there are persons from significantly different time zones who are with us. I agree with Judith concerning the presentation and the work which has been done on this. And this is very important for us. Why is it so important for us? Allow me to take this perhaps from a slightly different perspective. For the OECS member states, islands of the OECS member states, most of our land space is coastal, and the significant portion of our natural capital actually lies in our marine jurisdictions.
David, you have some slight feedback. I don't know if you can address it.
I do not know if there's another mic which is open somewhere, but I am not having that myself. So
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes. So I was making the point that for the OECS member states, as concerning our circumstances, it's important to note that our island space, our land, our terrestrial space is actually significantly coastal in nature. And that significantly most of our natural capital is within our maritime zones, our maritime jurisdictional area. And so while we are using the colors of green and blue, fundamentally, we are talking about the approaches which are sustainable. We are talking about the approaches which are then in accordance with the triple bottom line of environmental, economic, and social sustainability. And in social sustainability, we want also to ensure that that manifests itself in sustainable work, and as well decent work for our citizens. It is important that we must have the level of reliance on ourselves. The OECS member states are within the Caribbean. They're largely SIDS and territories there, and they're among the most vulnerable in the world. They are exposed to a variety of these vulnerabilities, as have been said, which are volcanic in nature. They are storms and hurricanes. We have been impacted by some of the strongest ever been known on record in the Atlantic region. And significantly, we are also in the state where we are blessed with a lot of our natural resources, endemic species, and so forth, but these are now in a state of degradation and some significantly to extinction. A lot of that is related to our own practices, which are resulting in pollution on land and in the marine environment, but these too have to be done and worked with. As concerning the need for us to move to the more engagement and recognizing the need for partnership, there are two concurrent things that are ongoing or done for the next decade for the focus. It is important to note that the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration and the UN Decade on Ocean Science for Sustainable Development are both intended to run from 2021 to 2030. Why is this so important? Because the former look at restoring degraded and destroyed ecosystems, and the latter on ocean science is to generate scientific knowledge and underpinning infrastructure and partnerships and the need for sustainable development. Within the OECS, while there has been the conversation, and Nicole in her introduction pointed out that the green-blue economy has been brought to the fore in 2010 and the blue in 2012, what we are able to say that has been happening in the OECS is that we have been working within the framework of an integrated indigenous island system management framework spanning from the summit of our hills to the seabed for effective implementation of obligations at national priorities for environmental sustainability, decent work, resilience in the maritime, coastal, and terrestrial areas, and across all sectors. The manifestation of these have been as concerning the ocean and blue economy, the Eastern Caribbean Regional Ocean Policy, which was adopted by the heads of government in 2013. This is now revised in 2019 and seek to have that embrace, which then even makes stronger the connection for including the private sector, for including all stakeholders, governmental, non-governmental, and the persons who are disadvantaged, those persons who are working in the coastal and marine environment. So I would stop here just to say that these are some of our work. Sorry, just before I go on, I want to make the point on one other initiative which is significantly important and which we are leading from the Commission as a response within the Ocean Governance and Fisheries Unit. And this is to do with the building resilience in the Eastern Caribbean through the reduction of marine litter. As concerning marine litter, over 80% of the water which enters the Caribbean Sea is regarded as polluted. As well, a significant portion of our reefs, over 70% are estimated to be damaged, and therefore what happens on land impacts also what happens on sea as an integrated whole, and linked to that are cross-border, cross-boundary, cross-national jurisdictions in terms of their origins, and these are also linked to climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David, for those preliminary thoughts. And as we can see, quite a bit to take in terms of the blue economy. And we noted that there were some questions concerning governance, and a little later we'll get back to David to answer these. But let's turn now over to Nicole. And Nicole, we are aware that your organization, Canary, has done quite a bit of work, as you indicated, with the green-blue economy. You've been working on the ground with CSOs, and we note a question coming in from the chat as to whether the CSOs have been engaged, and can the, this informal part of the economy really participate in this new green-blue economy? Can you share with us, I know you've also done some work with international communities on the green economy. Can you share with us your thoughts and perhaps take some of the questions in terms of how we can really involve the informal sector, part of the economy, as part of the green-blue economy?
Thank you, Judith. And I really appreciate these questions and emphasizing the importance of this. So deal with them separately. First, the informal, and as Mikhail said, the small and micro enterprise sector, but also the informal sector, a lot of them informal, a huge part of the Caribbean economy. I think the last figure I remember, Mikhail would probably know better, is 60% of the CARICOM economy is small and micro enterprises. So it's a huge, significant part that needs attention. And I'd like somebody to correct me on the figure.
Yeah, it's about 30 to 40%, Nicole.
In the OECS or regionally?
Regionally, yeah.
Right. And so I think there's growing recognition internationally of the importance of this sector and focusing on this sector if we want inclusiveness and sustainability, because also remember, a lot of times, poor, vulnerable, marginalized people are driven to unsustainable use. So really need to be brought into the economy. And the last global meeting of the Green Economy Coalition, which was held in India, which has a massive informal, small and micro enterprise sector, this point was really hammered home, and they need to focus on this sector. So it is a key component, a key objective in the OECS plan as recommended. On the role of civil society, of CSOs, civil society organizations, critical part of a participatory, inclusive, integrated economic governance, which is something I think for Canary as a civil society organization ourselves, there's a huge need to strengthen our participatory approach to economic governance across the entire region. Civil society organizations can play all roles in this process, from conceptualizing and planning the approach. I think they play a critical role because civil society organizations are innovators. They understand the issue on the ground. They have a huge amount of innovation in them that we can harness and help to really shape the approach in the region and in the sub-region. Advocacy and engagement by civil society is critical in helping to shape policies, in helping to shape how we transform our institutions and our governance models, and what decisions we take on what are the priorities area that we work on. They really need to have that voice and that say in decision making. Civil society organizations can play a huge role in knowledge sharing, awareness raising, mobilizing the citizenry. We need a whole of society approach. It's very much the message, the partnership message really needs to involve all citizens in this transformation of how we approach economic development. Fourthly, civil society organizations have a key role to play in implementation. They have capacity, their position, they're on the ground, and I think they need the partnerships and the mechanisms to be able to collaborate with government and collaborate with the regional and global agencies to help deliver real change on the ground. Finally, that closing the loop, civil society organizations need to play a role in monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So really tracking the transformation. What are we doing? What is working? What can be improved? What is the journey that we need to take moving forward? So I really appreciate the comment on that. And I think civil society organizations have a critical role to play in this transformation of economic development. And then the informal micro enterprises need special attention and special focus. These are the most vulnerable people. They're often very marginalized from mainstream economic development and really need special attention if we are to have an inclusive economy. Thank you, Judith.
Thanks, Nicole. And I see you shared quite a bit in terms of how we can engage them. And given that there's so much diversity in the CSOs, they have different roles that they can play. So we're very fortunate to have somebody from the private sector, Mr. Dunstan DeMille, and he is a representative of Massey Stores St. Lucia. And Mikhail would have indicated that even when governments plan into agencies who have a mandate to help development plan, it's important for the private sector to be a very critical, they have a critical role in this whole green-blue economy transition. And so we want to welcome Dunstan, and we recognize that Massey Stores is a well-established company in the region. It's not a micro enterprise, so the challenges that the micro enterprises may face, they perhaps have an advantage here. But can you share with us why your company has been involved in the green-blue economy, what you've been doing, and how you've been supporting other perhaps small players in making that transition towards the green-blue economy?
Good morning, everybody. Good evening, good night, and thank you. And my name is Dunstan DeMille, and I'm the perishables manager of Massey Stores, St. Lucia. And I'm responsible for the agricultural programs and dealing with a number of other areas which fall under perishables within the company. But before I even start, let me really thank Mikhail Andrew for this presentation. I could swear he got some input from me, because a lot of the times I was listening, I'm seeing some of the things we were already, doing. I sure persons know that we came from a merger with JQ's and Julian's, and we formed what you call Consolidated Foods at the time. And now we are Massey Stores. The concept of working with the agricultural sector have not changed. In fact, it have even improved. And we understand a lot of the issues that we face in that sector and have been putting things in place to really see how, in fact, to really give support to the sector. I'm sure you may be aware or may not be aware that we have a loans program for our farmers that have been there from 2010, since we had the drought in 2010. And this loans program have been going on for quite a while. Our farmers don't need any deposit or they don't pay any interest on those loans. We give up to $5,000 for a single loan. And farmers can take as much as they want in 1 year. Once they're able to pay it, we give farmers a year to pay every loan. We even have what you call grace periods, because some people were actually out of production, and we had to understand those dynamics. Because how do they get into production when they don't have the means? One of the other areas I know that have been a real challenge, and that's where the governments and whatnot comes in, is land acquisition, getting access to land. And I think in whatever policy we have in moving forward, we must take those things into consideration. Make sure we have a good land bank or a system where we have lands that put aside for agricultural purposes, because if COVID-19 taught us one thing, is that we really need to produce our own food. We must also, we remember the youth also, and that's why we have what you call in place a HOOPS program, helping out our primary and secondary school. We do that program through ICA. We gave a lot of the primary and secondary schools that are in that program now, I think we have about 18 or so in that program now, a greenhouse and a number of items that they need to produce food. And we gave them a guarantee that we would buy every food they produce that meet our standard. And we have been doing that since. The other aspect I am a little worried about is even as we now in our COVID-19, we are seeing some of those issues coming up, and it's about food nutrition. A lot of persons are gravitating to canned and other foods instead of taking some of the healthy foods. So we have to almost be tracking our sales on produce almost on a daily basis, because so that we can make good decisions, because it's a really challenge now. People are not seeing that as the option of picking up when they go at the store. We must put things in place to make sure that we don't create a bigger issue, because we know our hypertension and our diabetes rate is very high. So it's important even during this time, we get people to eat healthy. One of the other challenges we face is having a good market intelligence system. And we have been working with our farmers trying to develop that. We now in consultation with a local company called Guru, and who knows, later we may be able to put out a lot more information on this once everything goes through. So I spoke about the nutrition. We have to really educate people on the choices they make while they're at the store, because then it creates another problem for us. Farmers start cutting down on their production. Now, you know what happens when farmers cut down on their production. We have problems down the road with shortage of food. There are a number of business opportunities in that sector. And we have been working with a number of young entrepreneurs, a number of young farmers all over the island. And when you go to our supermarkets, you will see, I mean, let's look at, we have the young guy doing lettuce. We even have coconut water. I mean, and those people create employment in their communities also. We have a young gentleman doing bay leaf. I mean, you know, and there's so much. Now, concerning the blue economy, I think that's an area, there are opportunities, but what we have done in that area, we are working with the local companies. Like we have a gentleman who sells fish from the south, and when the St. Lucia Fish Marketing Corporation was operational, we were working closely with them. We also work closely with Superior Fish, but we also had plans which we were already working on to create tilapia ponds, and we had Christopher Cox and some other people doing it, where that production would be, where the fish would be processed in Dennery, but that didn't get off the ground.
Thank you so much, Dunstan. I think you've given us quite a wide
I just wanted to tell you one other aspect, because I know we spoke about partnerships, and I was telling you, if you go back to the social and economic review of the St. Lucia government, you'll see where we built a partnership with Renwick and Company, I mean ICA, the St. Lucia Agricultural Society. We built partnership with a number of key stakeholders to create what we call the Massey Stores Roots and Tuber program. And I mean, you could go on there, I think it's 2006 Social and Economic Review, and you could get some more information on that. So I am really for the partnership, because I think that's how we need to go. We do not need to reinvent the wheel. And I know our company stands ready to assist in any way we can, because we believe in what we do. And a lot of the time, we put our money behind it too.
Okay, great. And I see some questions coming for you, but before we go back to Dunstan, Michael, you raised an important concern in terms of whilst we deal with COVID-19 and the recovery efforts and the haste for us to rebuild our economy, there's the risk of us going back to the bad practices. And I see a question coming from Linda, I think, in the chat. And this is specifically for the cruise sector, but I think it's a question for all of us in terms of how do we rebuild without those destructive ways? For instance, she's asking, how do we ensure that the cruise sector can be part of that green blue economy? Perhaps, David, you may want to take this question.
Thank you very much, Judith. This is a significant question for us because of the level of involvement and dependence on many of our economies on the cruise industry. Let me say, even before I touch this, one of the things that the research is finding is the existence of COVID for nearly a month period in some parts of ships. And I'm not just talking about the cabins or the boards, but in the belly of some of the mechanisms. What then does that say to us? What would be the approaches? It is essential that we seek a new engagement, a new partnership, a new understanding. One of the principles that we had long wanted to work on within the OECS was that of how do we ensure that while the cruise industry, which does very well and is until COVID was the most productive part of the tourism most productive subsector in the tourism industry in terms of its earnings, was having significant impacts on some of our areas. So that how do we bear that impact? I think this is an opportunity to re-engage in that conversation, which had been going on for decades and which had not gotten the kind of traction that we need to see and have. So it is important that we do this in a very balanced way, mindful that we look at how we transition out of it. I recall that even in the conversation with the CARICOM government, which was in Barbados fairly early, the Florida Caribbean cruise lines were present. And so this is a significant part of what we need to do. Look at the opportunities for transitioning, look at the ways in which we may be able to see how we can have value added in other areas which we may not have contemplated before, but exploring these optional and new things as we seek to re-engineer economic growth within our countries in a sustainable manner that moves us towards resilience. Thanks much.
Yes, thanks, David. And Mikhail, perhaps you can share some thoughts here. We noticed that there are some recommendations in terms of alternative energy communities. Perhaps you and Nicole would care to comment on that, but we would love to hear some feedback from you, Mikhail, in terms of how do we move forward.
Yeah, and thank you, Linda, for raising that issue, as well as David for your response. I happen to have been involved in a recent restructuring of tourism strategy for St. Lucia with an international group out of Italy. And one of the things that was highlighted at the outset was the issue of cruise tourism. Because the fact of the matter is the crowding out, the deleterious effect on stay over tourism, you know, the effect on the marine environment, the resource use issues with cruise tourism, and the economic viability to the country were all issues that came to the fore. If I may, I would say to you that our approach to cruise tourism has been a bit, has evolved from a position of desperation. And that is understandable, because unlike in most countries, our terrestrial tourism, there are many segments of the population that benefit a little more from cruise tourism than from stay over tourism. So we have taxi drivers, we have some vendors, we have some tour sites that are almost entirely attractions and so on, dependent on cruise tourism. But that has all to do with our approach to the positive arithmetic and the triple bottom line. So using this that we did in St. Lucia, one of the things we felt is that terrestrial tourism is not focused enough on inclusiveness. It's not focused enough on allowing visitors in a seamless way to enjoy the full cultural and domestic offerings of the country. Because in the case of St. Lucia, for instance, 80% of the rooms are all inclusive. And you know what that means. So it is really a whole reapproaching. No one is saying no cruise tourism, but we believe that it has to be more responsible. We believe it has to be less penetrative because our projections show that you would have in a more dynamic scenario a much greater impact on wealth creation, a much greater impact on the environment, a much greater impact on what you call responsible tourism. If you structured your tourism in a way to have more visitors that are themselves ethnocentric, coming in as stayover as opposed to cruise. The cruise should be very, very carefully selected. It should be the higher end ones with smaller ships and so on. As you know, Bermuda has for years used a head tax that went up to $100 and something to limit the number of cruise visitors. And when that didn't work, they had to simply have a physical limit. Anguilla is the only Caribbean country that has not ever, and that is their policy, welcomed any cruise visitors. And so it is something that we have to take a long and hard look at. But my humble suggestion is go back to the triple bottom line approach and see wherever cruise or any other activity negates any one of those things, we should be rethinking that.
Thank you so much, Michaelan. Colleagues, we are running out of time, so I would give the final say to Nicole. And what I will do is just put two questions to you that we got from the chat. One, you are part of this work, and we see a lot of very good initiatives where policy, technology, all kinds of studies are being done. How do we translate the reports into real action? And a question, especially given your experience with the community groups, how do we cascade the technology, the data, those high-level initiatives to the common man, to the average fisherman, the average farmer, so that we become smart farmers, we become smart fishermen? How do we inculcate technology and innovation as part of this green-blue economy? Nicole.
Thanks, Judith, and thanks to Yves Laurent for that question. I think the issue of, we call it scaling out and scaling up. So scaling out is really spreading all of these good practices. And remember, some of these good practices and innovations come from farmers and fishermen themselves. So I think capturing that innovation that's happening on the ground. And this is a great place where civil society organizations, community organizations who are on the ground can play a role. There is already this network that can help to mobilize, share knowledge, share innovation. So I think that is a really critical point. And this scaling up idea is getting this into policy. So very often our policies do not enable the change that people want to make. So for example, having subsidies on pesticides, subsidies on imported food is not helping this transition. So the policies must be changed to enable this transformation that we want. The other question really, how can it be taken seriously? I think, Augustine, I think this needs to be seen as not a government thing or an OECS commission thing. I think it's critical that we take a whole of society approach, we take the partnership approach. We are all on board. Private sector, we heard excellent from Marcy and the role they're playing and the leadership that they are taking. Civil society, a lot of comments on that. The regional agencies, UNEP is here and offering support. How can they collaborate? This needs to be a really collective approach, not a written document. The written document is there, it's a framework, it's very useful, but we need to all take responsibility then to say, what role can I play? What role can my organization play in the transformation in the OECS? And Canary is really excited, and we are certainly taking this on board in our work and our work programs, and very happy to be collaborating with the OECS Commission again on this. So thank you.
Thanks,
Judith.
Nicole. Thanks. I think you did a great job handling that question. And as you said, the private sector is key. So we have 1 minute to give to our panelists from the private sector. Just over to Dunstan. Final comments, if you could just share. I know you've done some work, your company has done some work in terms of plastic management. 30 seconds to share with us what you have done and what you plan to do going forward.
Yeah, well, we have done the reduction of plastic, and soon you will see a composting program that we try and find ways to limit the amount of waste going to the landfill. We have also hired a consultant where we are looking into the amount of cardboard that is generated through our stores. How do we prevent all of that from going into the landfill, right? We have even looked into solar energy. Our 2 main warehouses, we have installed solar panels, and we have 2 other outlets that will be done as soon as we get over COVID-19. And next year, we will still looking to do 2 other of our outlets, right? The work with our farmers will continue as we adjust to the COVID-19.
Thank you so much, Dunstan. I think we've had a very rich conversation. This is just the beginning of the discussion, and there's a lot more that we can say, but we encourage you to check our website. We will be sending you the report. Please submit your comments, and I turn you over to Joan now for some closing remarks.
Okay, thank you very much for the panelists for such a lively discussion, and Judith, my thanks to you in particular for being able to engage and consolidate the questions and get the feedback from the panelists. Please, the polls are open, I believe. The poll, I'm not seeing it, is open, so I am hoping that everybody, before you sign off, that you ensure that you complete the questionnaire. So we are now also a reminder that the PowerPoint presentation and the executive summary will be on the website. We might look to see, because a couple of people asked about the recording, whether it is possible to also post it. So with our IT unit, we are going to look into that and put it onto the website. Any comments, and because I'm sure there are still a few more comments, please, you all can email Nicole at Leotard@Canary, or McHale, who is the author of the Green Blue Economy Strategy, and the email addresses are there, or myself at the OECS. We welcome that because this strategy, it is for us in the region, so we need as much input as possible. And also, if you have any persons, especially in the private sector and the communities, please encourage them to also look into this and provide feedback. We are also welcome if we have to do any presentations at the community level. This is another avenue that we can probably explore. with this, before I sign off, I don't know if Chamberlain and Nicole, if you all have any closing remarks.
Thanks, John. I think it was a really excellent conversation. The feature presentation and the contributions from the panel, very insightful and if I may say, exciting. And we also appreciate very much all the feedback, both in questions and recommendations that we got. And be assured that we will take these into consideration, and we look to interact with you even more where more details are required. So thank you so much, and we encourage you to continue to participate in our future webinars. As Joan said, in the immediate term, we would have one weekly, especially on the Wednesday, and moving forward, we will keep you abreast. Thank you so much.
Okay, it appears that I don't see the poll. Yes, so the poll icon seems to have disappeared, so we will have to follow up. What we might try and do is probably send to your an email and ask you all to complete the questionnaire online. So thank you. I want to say a special thanks to Mikhail for all the work that he has done. Is basically, though he's supposed to be a consultant, he has done far in excess of what he's compensated for. So it's really a labor of love for him. I also want to thank Canary because they did a lot of the groundwork in terms of the green economy and also supporting us and collaborating with us to develop and expand it into the green-blue economy. Another special thanks to our IT unit for facilitating this webinar, as well as our communications unit for promoting. And we will be looking to you all again to continue to support us, to continue to provide feedback and to engage in the implementation of the green-blue economy, because it's not something for the OECS Commission or Canary, it is for the region. And wherever we can contribute, and especially this pandemic has brought to mind, there are certain areas that we probably need to see how we could be more efficient. So, and also the opportunities that we can have. So I want to thank all the attendees, all the participants, and the panelists and the backup team. Have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar, hopefully next week. Bye.